They said they'd be right back, but the truth is, they were never coming back for me. It was already dark when the car pulled into the gravel lot. The sky hung low, swollen with October rain, and the buzz of the flickering overhead lights made everything feel more silent, not less. The gas station sat like a forgotten outpost on Route 9, tucked behind fields of nothing. There were no other cars, no music on the radio, just the rhythmic click of the cooling engine and the quiet rustle of Hayden chewing on a juice box straw in the back seat. I didn't understand it then, not fully. But something in me that small voice we're taught to ignore started whispering the moment my dad put the car in park. "Get out for a second, Sloan," he said, eyes still on the road ahead. His tone wasn't angry, just flat, like he was giving instructions to a stranger. My mother said nothing. She stared out the passenger window, her arms folded tightly across her chest. Rain tapped gently on the glass like it was waiting for a cue. She didn't look at me. That more than anything made my chest clench. David reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled $20 bill and a folded piece of paper. "Get something to eat. We'll be back in 10. Hayden piped up from behind me. "Can I go too?" "No." David snapped, not loudly but sharp enough to still her instantly. I opened the door. The cold air hit fast and wet, slicing through my thin denim jacket. I stepped out, gravel shifting beneath my sneakers. When I turned to shut the door, my dad's eyes flicked to me for the briefest second, and then the car was already backing up. I thought it was a joke, some weird parenting thing. A test, maybe. I watched the red brake lights disappear onto the highway. I waited. 5 minutes? 10. My legs began to ache from standing. Rain started in slow needles. The bill in my hand turned soft. I walked inside. The clerk barely looked up. He was young, mid-20s, maybe too absorbed in a scratched lottery ticket behind the counter. I lingered near the candy aisle, pretending to choose something. Every time a car whooshed past outside, I darted to the window. Nothing stopped. 40 minutes later, the clerk glanced at me, then at the clock. "You got someone picking you up?" he asked. I nodded instinctively. "My parents. They just had to turn around." He made a face skeptical, but not unkind. "You want to wait in here? You're soaked." I nodded again. He handed me a towel from behind the counter. I sat on a plastic bench near the ice cooler, my jacket dripping onto the tile, the hem sticking to my legs. An hour passed, then another. He gave me a cup of hot water and instant cocoa. I don't remember saying thank you. My throat was too tight. I just stared at the door. Eventually, he made a phone call. I heard him say, "Yeah, girl's about 13. Been here 3 hours. Doesn't seem like anyone's coming back." The note was still in my pocket. I hadn't opened it yet. The rain got heavier. The gas station smelled like burnt coffee and lemon floor cleaner. My hands wouldn't stop shaking even with the cocoa. I clutched the edge of the bench so hard the tips of my fingers went white. Around midnight, a police cruiser pulled up. Lights dimmed. A woman stepped out in uniform, tan windbreaker, clipboard in hand. She knelt in front of me, her voice low and kind. "Hey there, sweetheart, I'm Officer Danner. Can you tell me your name?" My lips parted. For a second, nothing came out. Then Sloan Rivers, I think. She wrote it down slowly, her eyes scanning my face like I might disappear if she looked away too long. I followed her to the cruiser without resistance. The clerk gave me a sad wave as I passed. I don't even think I waved back. The inside of the patrol car was warm. It smelled like vinyl and cheap coffee. I sank into the back seat, the jacket around me heavy, useless against the kind of cold that seeps from the inside out. The officer started the engine. Country radio played softly. Only then did I unfold the paper. 4 words scribbled in David's exacting hand. "Some kids aren't meant to stay. You're better off gone. They erased me from their lives." But paper doesn't lie. Records remember what people choose to forget. The room was always cold. Not freezing, not hostile, just enough to remind you that comfort was not a priority. I sat alone in the secure booth, a retinal scanner blinking amber beside me, the system waiting for a decision I already made. Override protocol, internal audit. Subject Rivers Sloan. Clearance strategic tier level 9. I spoke clearly, letting my voice thread into the machine's listening grid. A brief delay. Then the screen responded with a sterile confirmation tone. I was in. It felt strange to see my name in government font again. Years of operations and silence had trained me to erase footprints, not retrace them. But this wasn't about nostalgia. This was about facts, evidence. Truth that had grown dust where it should have sparked alarms. The file appeared bare bones, skeletal. Name ID number 1 photo. West Point enrollment 1 year. Status inactive. Reason psychiatric instability candidate deemed unfit for extended service. Signed, dated, May 2004. The digital signature was unmistakable. David R. Rivers. I stared at it longer than I should have, not because I doubted, but because even now, 20 years later, there was a part of me still waiting for it to be someone else. I leaned back, fingers steepled, letting the implications settle in the corners of the room. David hadn't just abandoned me. He'd taken steps to make sure the system forgot I'd ever existed in it. He hadn't destroyed me. He'd deleted me. The monitor's glow outlined the edge of my jaw. I reached into the inner pocket of my coat and pulled out a folded slip of paper, a handwritten log I'd jotted earlier that week, names of people who might have known the old system before automation replaced them. One name had a small star beside it. Fulton Charles A., retired clerk. Known for remembering everything. Rumored to have once flagged a general's fake citation and lived to tell it. I found him in the archives annex near Judiciary Square, tucked behind an unmarked door with peeling paint and a smell of boiled coffee. The light flickered in half the hallway. I knocked twice. Fulton, I called. Depends who's asking, came a voice from the other side, gruff, skeptical, maybe a decade out of practice. Sloan Rivers, looking into a 2004 deletion order. Strategic file path. You were listed on the chain of custody. A pause. Then the door opened. He was thinner than I expected, with skin like yellowing paper and a posture that suggested war with gravity. I remember that name, he said immediately, but I remember the signature more. He motioned me in past shelves of printed logs and backup microfiche that had survived at least 2 digitization waves. We stood before an old steel filing cabinet. He tapped the top drawer. Nothing digital about this part. Back then, you wanted someone gone, you needed 2 things, a signature, and silence. I waited as he rummaged through laminated logs. He pulled one, laid it flat. I recognized the notation instantly. Same ops code as my deleted file. His finger landed beside it. That day, he muttered, I flagged the request. Didn't make sense, young cadet, no psych flags prior. And the author overrode chain protocol. David Rivers, I finished for him. Fulton nodded. Didn't realize the name meant anything to you. It did. He was my father. He didn't blink, just muttered, they draft some kids too early. Others, they draft them wrong. I thanked him. He offered me a cup of weak coffee. I declined. Back in my apartment, the glow of my monitors lit the sparse room, just a table, a stack of case folders, and the hum of strategic doctrine models playing on loop. The air smelled like stale ink and quiet resolve. I sent a back-channel ping to Latin Vega. I need deletion log traces. 2004, proxy IPs used under admin override keyword Rivers. She responded in seconds. Vega, why me? Because systems obey what people won't admit. It took her less than a day. The results came in encrypted. The IP led to an internal terminal from 2004 registered under the Command Integrity Office. Assignment log, David Rivers. I didn't flinch. Instead, I walked across the room to the old drawer I kept sealed, labeled in black marker, personal, do not open. I pulled it open slowly. Inside were years of unopened letters, all addressed to me from family members who sent them not to apologize, but to ensure I wouldn't speak. Hope you're doing well. Don't come back. No return address. Good luck. A typed note from Elaine, short, emotionless. We don't have space for your kind of story. Please don't write again. I sat down on the edge of my bed, the stack of letters in my lap like a weight I'd stopped noticing. I had told myself none of this mattered. That survival was enough. That truth could be quiet. But silence had a cost. And I had paid enough. They hadn't seen me in 2 decades. So when I showed up on national television wearing stars on my shoulders, they turned pale. The lights at the defense summit were clinical sharp-edged things. I could feel them tracing every wrinkle in my uniform, every line carved across my face by sandstorms and briefings and years of silence. I stood behind the podium in a conference hall that buzzed with the low hum of anticipation, flanked by flags and formalities, the air too clean, the audience too polite. I'd rehearsed the speech a dozen times. I didn't need notes. Doctrine had always lived in my marrow, but I also knew I wasn't just speaking to the brass in front of me. Somewhere down in Tennessee, a living room sat lit by a TV screen, and for the first time in 20 years, I was going to haunt it. Good afternoon. I began, voice steady. Today we explore post-conflict intelligence, how to rebuild trust when systems collapse, and what it means to carry unseen scars from the shadows of war. The camera feed I knew was live, syndicated to military networks carried by the Department of Defense's own media branch. Standard protocol. But nothing about today was standard. I paused briefly. On cue, the camera zoomed in. The image that beamed across America was tight face-framed nameplate, crisp rank stars glinting just enough. Rivers Sloan Brigadier General, 3 states south in a modest house with beige carpet and a clock that ticked too loudly. A television flickered. Elaine Rivers sat perched at the edge of a floral love seat, her spine a perfect line of inherited discipline. David stood with arms folded back, half turned to the screen. Hayden, legs curled under her, blinked slowly as the image on screen settled into focus. The neighbor spoke first. "Isn't that your girl?" she asked, a hand pressed lightly to her chest. "Sloan, right?" Elaine didn't answer. Her lips twitched, but no sound came. Her hands remained motionless on her lap. David grunted low, barely audible, and walked out of the room. Hayden's mouth hung slightly open. She looked like someone who'd just heard a name spoken that was never meant to be said aloud. Back on stage, I continued. "War isn't always declared," I said. "Sometimes it's implied. Sometimes it begins in the quiet spaces between silence and judgment, between expectations and exiles." I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. Silence makes its own kind of echo. "We don't always come home with medals," I added, eyes flicking toward the camera. "Some of us weren't meant to shine in family portraits. We became our own constellations instead." A soft gasp from the crowd. A ripple. On the feed, the camera lingered half a second longer than it should have. In Tennessee, the neighbor's brows lifted. "Well, I'll be." I always wondered what happened to her. Hayden didn't blink. Her hand gripped the throw pillow in her lap like it might anchor her to a version of reality that hadn't just cracked in half. Elaine finally spoke, her voice barely a breath. She wasn't supposed to. But she didn't finish the sentence. The room stayed frozen for a few long seconds after the screen cut to another speaker. No one moved. Then Hayden rose slowly, eyes still locked on the blank TV screen. "We need to talk to her," she murmured, voice tight with something between awe and fear, "before this gets worse." When the phone rang and I saw her name, I didn't feel rage. I felt strategy forming. The screen lit up in the dim room, just her name, Elaine Rivers, glowing cold against the dark. No photo, no affectionate nickname. Just the 2 words that once defined everything and now triggered nothing but instinct. I let it ring twice before answering. I didn't say hello. "Sloan." The voice was thin, barely more than a breath. There was a quality to it I hadn't heard in decades. Not warmth, no, never that, but fragility, pretending to be composure, like glass trying to pass for steel. "You called," I said evenly. "Yes, I thought maybe we could talk." Silence. "Then Hayden and your father? We think it's time to reconnect." "It's been so long and you looked..." A pause. "Well, you mean I looked visible," I replied. There was no protest. Only another pause, longer this time. In the background, I could hear faint voices, the clink of a cup, the scrape of a chair. Someone whispered something. Then Hayden's voice broke through, louder than intended. It would look better for everyone. So that was it. Not grief, not guilt. Optics. I stood by the window, one hand on the frame, the other resting on the phone's speaker. Outside, the lights of DC blinked like an indifferent galaxy. My reflection hovered faintly in the glass uniform off-sleeves rolled hair pinned with tactical precision even in rest. "I'll come," I said after a beat. Elaine exhaled sharply as if bracing for a refusal and stunned by the absence of it. But I added, "I don't eat what I can't stomach." The line went quiet again. Then a clipped, "Dinner's at 7, Sunday." She hung up without waiting for a response. I stood motionless for another minute before turning toward the shadow in the doorway. "You heard all of it," I said. Vega stepped into the light, arms crossed, face unreadable. "Didn't have to." The tone said enough. She leaned against the desk. "They're not reaching out, Sloane. They're reeling you in. There's a difference." I nodded, though the words had already formed in my head before she said them. I wasn't being welcomed. I was being staged. A piece repositioned on the board after 20 years of being ignored, removed, redacted. "Dinner's the setup," I murmured. "The real conversation will be the silence after." Vega tilted her head. "So what's your move?" I didn't answer. Instead, I crossed the room and opened the bottom drawer of the metal cabinet I kept locked with a 3-digit combination I never shared. Inside lay a manila folder, its label faded, but still legible in black marker, "Grant family, redacted." It wasn't about them, not in name, but it was always about pattern. Inside were documents, copies of old inter-office memos, flagged entries from access logs, printed email headers from 2005 to 2019, each one loosely tied to another family, another soldier, another quiet erasure. A case study in systemic abandonment. I'd started collecting them after the third operator I trained vanished from the promotion roster with no explanation. The same pattern every time: questionable mental health note, early discharge stamp, family cited as uninformed or not present. Names changed. Signatures didn't. I added to it quietly over the years. A pattern map. A silent web. A dossier no one had asked for until now. I slipped a fresh page into the folder. It was a printed frame from the broadcast me at the podium, eyes direct, mouth mid-sentence. But it wasn't the image that made my chest tighten. It was the red ink circling my face. I recognized the pen stroke, the tilt, the pressure. Hayden's handwriting. No message. No context. Just a single red circle, like a target drawn over the person they hadn't expected to reappear. I closed the folder. Then I locked the drawer. They greeted me like a visiting diplomat. Smiles too wide, table too perfect. Nothing alive ever felt that staged. The air inside the Rivers house was artificially warm, like the scent of lemon wax, and denial had been simmering all day. Elaine opened the door with a kind of formal ease, like she was hosting a charity donor, not her estranged daughter. Her lipstick was flawless. Her hands trembled only once, barely enough to notice. "Sloane," she said. Not a question, not a welcome. Just the name suspended in the air like it had been pulled from a drawer and dusted off for display. I stepped inside. The walls were covered with new frames. Hayden at commissioning, Hayden at award ceremonies, Hayden shaking hands with brass I'd briefed from the shadows. There wasn't a single photograph of me, not even the old ones. The table had been set for 4. Polished silverware, starched napkins folded like they'd been ironed into shape. At the center, a floral arrangement too symmetrical to have been chosen by accident. Elaine gestured to the chair opposite Hayden. "You're just in time. Everything's ready." The last time I sat at that table, my seat had been missing entirely. This time, it was laid out like a trap. Forks that never touched my food. A name card that didn't exist. David entered the room with a slow, measured pace. He gave me a curt nod, the kind reserved for dignitaries or threats. "Welcome home." "I didn't say I was home," I replied, brushing past him. Hayden was already seated, her uniform pristine, posture textbook perfect. She looked up as I approached, a flicker of something: nervousness, pride, resentment passing through her features like a cloud across the moon. Then it was gone. "Glad you came," she offered, voice a little too smooth. I never said I wouldn't. I answered. Dinner began. Conversation tiptoed around landmines. Elaine asked about the weather in D.C. Hayden talked about her recent tactical seminar. David focused on cutting his steak with excessive precision, as though silence could be carved like meat. The food was excellent, flavorless. The neighbors showed up 15 minutes in a woman I barely recognized, cheeks flushed from wine or effort. She entered uninvited, laughing loudly as she set down a store-bought pie. I just had to stop by. I saw the broadcast. I mean, both of you serving your country. So proud of both daughters in uniform. The room held its breath. Elaine's smile stretched unnaturally. Yes, she said tightly. We're very fortunate. David froze mid-chew. Hayden stared down at her plate like the peas might rearrange into an escape route. I looked at the neighbor, then back to the table. One of us earned her uniform. I said each word clipped and clear. The other borrowed it. Elaine's fork hit her plate with a soft metallic clink. David set down his glass. That's not fair. No, I agreed. It's precise. The neighbor mumbled something about traffic and excused herself. The door clicked shut behind her like the final note of a funeral hymn. There was a moment, just one, where the silence felt heavier than the table. Then David spoke. We always hoped you'd come back better. I laughed once. Cold, brief. I didn't come back, I said, eyes locked on his. I rose. There's a difference. Elaine's hands fidgeted beneath the tablecloth. Hayden said nothing. I stood up before dessert was served. No one stopped me. As I passed Hayden, I leaned in just enough to whisper, "Don't rehearse your next speech too much. The truth might trip you." Her shoulders stiffened. She didn't turn to watch me leave, but I felt her eyes on my back all the way to the door. The truth doesn't die. It just waits filed under wrong names behind doors no one dares open. Fort Alegre never advertised its lower levels. Above ground, it posed as a logistics hub, endless rows of marked containers. Uniformed personnel on autopilot paperwork moved in triplicate. But beneath that concrete order was something colder, steel corridors buried deep in the foundation, humming with secrets and silence. That was where I needed to go. The elevator didn't respond to civilian IDs. It required retinal confirmation, followed by a secondary biometric sequence and two-person validation. I'd only gotten down here once before, years ago, under orders not suspicion. Tonight, I came without either. Vega met me 2 blocks from the perimeter, her hair pulled tight, eyes sharper than I'd ever seen them. "Tunnel relays patched," she said, handing over a military-grade keycard that wasn't hers. 30-second spoof window, once you swipe. After that, you're either in or arrested. Comforting, I muttered. Inside, the air chilled by degrees. The steel walls swallowed sound. My boots echoed, but the sound never traveled far, absorbed like regret. I swiped the keycard at the first gate. The light blinked green. Below level B, Vega's digital backdoor activated. I moved swiftly through checkpoint after checkpoint, bypassing logs that were supposed to alert security, but now sent nothing but static. The room I wanted was labeled Archive 7G, no plaque, just an embossed seal flaking from time. A lone clerk stood inside, seated behind an outdated terminal. He glanced up as I entered. "Staff Sergeant Lenz," I asked. He nodded, half rising. "You're not on the manifest." "I'm not here officially," I said, showing a blank clearance card, "but you'll find the override directive under Protocol Echo subfile Delta Rain." He hesitated, typed something, then paled. "This was pulled last week, then reversed." I didn't delete it. That's why I'm here." He looked like he wanted to argue. Instead, he stood and left the room with a muttered, "Be quick." I sat at the terminal and began the trace. Vega had seeded a path through the audit logs, a breadcrumb trail scattered across years of silent alterations. It led to a buried operation log labeled Mercury 5/5/2007. I opened it. The mission was mine. I knew every detail, terrain orders, fallback contingencies, but my name was nowhere in the official file. The commendation for strategic command had been reassigned to a junior officer I'd barely met. Scrolling further, I found the accompanying memo. Subject SS Rivers deemed mentally unfit for extended command role, recommend reassignment or expulsion pending. It was signed D. Rivers. The cursor hovered over the digital signature, glowing faintly. I didn't blink. He hadn't just abandoned me at a gas station. He'd followed me into adulthood, into ranks and war zones, and carved me out of my own victories with bureaucratic precision. I exhaled slowly, then checked the date, 3 days after Operation Mercury concluded. 3 days after I'd returned to base with an exhausted unit and 26 survivors who would never know they weren't supposed to credit me. Backtrack. There was more. Vega's patch cracked open a buried surveillance packet. Video feed, grainy time-stamped 2007. A man in uniform entered the server core after midnight. No one else on record. The footage was warped, but I knew the gait. The squared shoulders. The clipped urgency. David Rivers. I stared as he keyed into the mainframe, inserted a hard token, and began a data dump. No one stopped him. No one questioned it. Until now. I returned to the root log and searched again. This time, I looked for something I hadn't dared before. Redact identity. GRN02S. Rivers status executed. I stared at the word until it blurred. My fingers curled into fists against the desk. Behind me, the door creaked. Lenz had returned face pale. Ma'am, I didn't turn. He stepped closer. You're not the first to look for these files. I stood slowly. Who? His voice cracked. Someone tried to wipe them completely last week. They didn't succeed, but whoever it was, they had top-level access. Real top. The kind that doesn't leave a signature. I met his eyes. He looked terrified. Be careful, he added in a whisper. This isn't just forgotten history. It's a trap someone still wants closed. They used my ideas, my tactics, my sacrifices. They just forgot they couldn't keep me quiet forever. The Doctrine Library at Langley East wasn't just off the map, it was off memory. Nestled beneath 5 floors of bureaucratic gloss, it required 4 separate levels of biometric clearance and an unspoken agreement not to ask too many questions. The walls were soundproof. The silence, however, wasn't just engineered, it was intentional. I stood beside the interface console watching as lines of Doctrine files scrolled across the translucent glass screen, each glowing line a breadcrumb in a trail of erasure. Vega's fingers moved fast, navigating command paths like they were muscle memory. She wore her wariness like armor today. No makeup, no jewelry, no idle chatter. Just the clean efficiency of someone who knew that truth in the wrong light could burn hotter than any warhead. Ready to run stylometric analysis? She asked, not looking up. I nodded. We had fed the AI engine a curated sample of my old field reports debriefings, strategy outlines, even annotated side memos I'd written for black site commanders. Vega cross-referenced them with a list of strategy doctrines published over the last 15 years under the Joint Strategy Task Force. Author Hayden Rivers. The engine began its analysis. I watched the waveform pulse. Language wasn't just words, it had rhythm. I'd developed mine from years of precision clip transitions, embedded redundancies, asymmetric phrasing, like fingerprints, only sharper. Seconds passed. Then the screen beeped. Match 94%, phrase cadence, structure, decision syntax. Even the encoded signature lines, those subtle loops of logic I'd used to distinguish protocol from instinct, were nearly identical. Vega whistled under her breath. I knew it felt familiar, she murmured. But this, it's surgical. I scrolled through the first file. StratRecon PRC 22 B, a joint operations model I'd authored during my second year embedded in Southeast Asia. The model had reduced civilian loss by 17% in its final test phase. It was now credited to Hayden. She'd spoken about it at the DC Symposium in 2020. The next ISR Radius MK.04, a layered intelligence matrix for high-risk communication corridors. Again my design, my field notes, but stamped with Hayden's initials and a task force timestamp. I paused over an archived email exchange, dated 2014. I remembered that week. I had drafted revisions from a desert compound with an IV in my arm post-surgery. The final version was labeled JST approved. I had never been copied on the approval. They didn't just borrow your work, Vega said, they repurposed your voice. Systematically. I said nothing. My hands remained steady, but my jaw ached from clenching. Was this authorized? She asked carefully. No. Did you know I suspected, I said. But suspicions don't hold weight in tribunals. Evidence does. She turned from the screen to face me. We all suspected Sloan. No one dared say it. That line hung in the air like smoke. I tapped into the ethics portal, an internal encrypted node used by officers to log ethical concerns or whistleblower evidence. I didn't type a word, Just uploaded a time-stamped data packet. No context, no accusation, just the breadcrumb, a digital heartbeat. Silent entries can't be deleted, I explained. Even if no one reads them today, the system remembers. Vega leaned back against the table. You're not planning to go public, are you? I looked at her. No, I said, voice calm. I'm planning to go visible. They used my ideas, my tactics, my sacrifices. They just forgot they couldn't keep me quiet forever. The doctrine vault smelled like ozone and forgotten ambition. Deep beneath the strategic analysis wing, it was one of those places only a handful of people knew existed. No windows, no clocks. Just silence, concrete, and light that buzzed without flickering. Vega sat at the neural interface station, her posture tense, fingers moving with mechanical efficiency. I ran the fourth batch through stylometric match, she said. 94% overlap with your linguistic fingerprint. I leaned over her shoulder. The screen pulsed with a series of documents, classified, all of them. Most dated between 2008 and 2014. I recognized the titles: Rapid Containment Doctrine for Gray Zone Conflict, Eastern Asymmetry Reversal Model, Counter Proxy Leadership Structures in Non-Declared Hostilities. These weren't just papers, they were pillars. Benchmarks cited in every modern military syllabus worth its weight in ink. My name wasn't on a single one. You're sure? I asked. Vega didn't look away. They used command phrasing patterns, syntax constructs, even transitional logic you haven't used since Candle Phase. That's not a coincidence. That's theft. She clicked to expand the metadata. The documents were published under Joint Strategy Task Force Office 3B. Author on file, Lieutenant Colonel Hayden Rivers. The floor didn't shift beneath me, but something inside me did. A quiet click. Like a lock disengaging. Why now? I asked aloud. Why recycle me into doctrine instead of burying it all? Vega answered too quickly. Because you were effective and invisible. The system likes when the two align. Her face shifted. I saw something flicker, shame maybe. Or recognition. Oh, we all suspected, she admitted. No one dared say it. I moved to the center console and called up a blank input log in the military ethics system. It wasn't built for declarations. It was built for data anomalies, flags, oddities that might someday justify an investigation. I didn't write an accusation, just a silent log, a timestamp, coordinates to a vault, file ID numbers, and a simple phrase in the comment line: original authorship contested, recommend internal review. I hit send. There was no ping of acknowledgement, no notification, just the soft hum of the database swallowing my input like a drop of ink in deep water. Vega turned toward me. You're not planning to go public, are you? I met her gaze. My voice was quiet, calm. No, I'm planning to go visible. The system was built to protect itself even from the truth. But I designed part of that system, and I remember the cracks. The hallway outside the Oversight Command's secure node was carpeted in silence. Not the soft kind. The institutional kind where even the air held its breath. It was the morning after Thanksgiving, and the building was half-staffed, running lean, assuming no one would test the system while leftovers were still warm. They underestimated me. Again. I swiped into the Tier 4 console chamber under the name I'd been assigned in 2011. Consultant S.R. Langley. Nobody had questioned its renewal because no one thought I was still watching. The room was small, metallic, soundproofed. Only one screen. No clock. Just the hum of containment. Vega waited inside, already logged in from a side terminal, her hair damp from the drizzle outside her eyes, sharp with anticipation. You're sure about this? She asked, though her fingers never left the keyboard. I pulled a worn ID badge from my pocket. The edges were scuffed, the photo cracked, the clearance still active. This system thinks it forgot me, I said. Time to remind it I never left. Echo Protocol had been a whisper, an emergency integrity routine embedded in the department's doctrine management framework, originally designed to trace authorship disputes and corruption within top-tier strategy files. I had built the skeleton of it years ago during a restructure, then buried it beneath 3 layers of conditional triggers. Because even then I'd known one day it might be me pressing the button. I keyed in the activation phrase manually. Echo initiate verify tiered command authorship, cross-check secondary clearance override, chain comparison target, Strategic Doctrines, 2005, present. The cursor blinked once, then again. Then Echo engaged, system audit pending, irregularity detected. On Vega's screen, flags began to bloom like heat across a thermal map. Redacted authorship pings, identity chain mismatches, operation credits dated under Hayden Rivers, yet drawing stylistic and metadata threads that pulled toward me, S.R. Langley, again and again. One more layer peeled back, and another name began to echo across the log: David Rivers. Clearance approval, overridden chain, 2007-2009. Internal Affairs wouldn't know what triggered the review yet. That was the beauty of Echo. It didn't accuse. It illuminated. They'll trace this back, Vega said under her breath. I hope they do, I replied. Across the room, the oversight monitor lit up with a new internal alert. Subject S.A. Rivers, strategic author, classified override expired. The subject line alone was a crack in the dam. I let the silence stretch before speaking. The lock's broken. Vega turned to me, a slow, knowing smile forming. Let the light in. Outside, the vault systems were already moving automated cross-references flooding into oversight queues. Doctrine review panels receiving encrypted pings. What had once been erased was now blinking on every secure console flagged for audit. We stepped out into the hallway together, unhurried. The building no longer felt silent. It felt unsettled. By the time I returned to my apartment, the rain had thickened into a sheet against the windows. I hung my coat, powered up the briefing console, and leaned back into the chair I hadn't used since last year. The phone buzzed once. Hayden's name. No pleasantries. Her voice sliced through the line like glass under tension. Did you just burn the house down? I stared at the ceiling a moment before answering. No, I said calmly, just open the windows. When wolves realize the fire isn't going out, they stop growling. They start folding. The barracks lounge was empty, lights dimmed to a low hum, vending machines blinking in lonely rhythm. It was the kind of space meant for waiting out storms, weather or otherwise. I arrived 5 minutes early. She was already there. Hayden sat curled into the far end of the long couch, her uniform traded for a slate gray hoodie and jeans that looked uncomfortably new. Civilian clothes had never fit her well, like someone pretending to be ordinary. Her hair was pulled back, but not neatly. Her eyes, when they met mine, carried a weariness I didn't recognize. She didn't stand when I entered, didn't posture, just nodded slightly like she wasn't sure whether I was there to finish her off or forgive her. I sat across from her, elbows on my knees. Neither of us spoke for a minute. Finally, she broke the silence. They called it a procedural review, but I know what it is. I said nothing. My clearance is under audit. Promotion cycle is frozen. There's a reprimand formal. It'll follow me. Good, I said, not out of cruelty. Just truth. Hayden flinched but didn't argue. Her fingers curled tighter around the cup in her hands. I wondered if it was even warm anymore, or if she was just holding on to something that still had shape. They want me to resign quietly, she added. No press, no profile. Just fade. Sounds familiar, I said. She winced. I didn't come here to beg, She looked up, then eyes wide raw. How did you do it? How did you survive with no one? No name. No proof. I studied her for a moment. The posture, the tightness in her jaw. She wasn't pretending anymore. Not even a little. You think I survived? I asked. I bled through years in silence. I watched my work, lifted my name erased, and my family toast promotions with my ideas. That wasn't surviving. That was enduring. Hayden looked down again. I don't know if I can do that. I didn't let the silence last this time. Then don't. She blinked. What withdraw? Volunteer overseas. Not in the spotlight. Not in strategy. Go where no one knows your name and learn how to earn something without legacy. Without me. Her lips parted. Would that be enough? I leaned back, exhaled. Not for me, but maybe for you. Hayden nodded slowly, as if translating each word into something usable. From the side pocket of her bag, she pulled out a small data pad, logged into her credentials, and tapped through the resignation portal. The room was silent except for the hum of the overhead light and the soft click of her stylus. She filled out the form slowly, reviewed every word. When she reached the signature line, her hand hovered. No tears, no speeches, just trembling fingers and a flick of her thumb. Submit. We sat in that stillness for another minute, maybe more. Then she stood, gave me a tired nod, and walked out without another word. I didn't follow. Back at my apartment, the air was crisp with rain outside. The hallway smelled faintly of pine cleaner and old paint. I opened my mailbox expecting nothing. Instead, I found a small, soft-wrapped package inside. No return label. I brought it into the living room and peeled back the paper slowly. Inside was my denim jacket, the same one I wore the night they left me at that gas station. Cleaned, pressed, folded with care. No note, just cloth and memory. A symbol returned, not reclaimed. I held it in my lap for a long time, thumb tracing the worn seam at the collar. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like something had been taken from me. I felt like something had been returned. They asked me to speak about strategy. I spoke about erasure. The conference hall at the DC Defense Ethics Summit gleamed with ceremonial austerity, brushed chrome podium navy drapes, seals embroidered in gold thread. An entire echelon of brass filled the seats, their metals catching the light like weaponized silence. Cameras tracked movement in slow, sweeping arcs. But I didn't flinch. I stood at the center of the stage, flanked by 2 digital panels and a moderator who'd introduced me like I was just another name on the schedule. I wasn't. Good morning. I began, voice clear, pace measured. Today's topic is intelligence integrity, how we build doctrine and what it means when we forget who built it. A few heads lifted from their tablets. We talk about systems, I continued, but systems don't write strategies. People do. And people can disappear intentionally or otherwise. Behind me, a projection lit up. Slide 1, a standard mission doctrine titled Hostile Decompression in Asymmetric Zones, author Joint Strategy Task Force. I clicked to the next, Proxy Collapse and Contingency Shaping. Same author, same structure. Then a third, Mercury Aftermath Analysis, Redacted Protocol Tier B. No listed author. But I recognized the phrasing, the voice between the lines, because it was mine. These, I said, turning slightly, are considered foundational texts. Taught, quoted, filed under collective authorship. I gestured to the 4th slide, but stylometric analysis shows otherwise. The final panel blinked into place, linguistic fingerprint overlays, matched syntax trees, command sequencing pattern maps. All traceable to one author, I said. A ripple moved through the room. Not words, just posture. A quiet shift. Chairs straightening, brows furrowing. In the audience, I saw Hayden row 5, right side, partially shadowed by an overhanging light. Her arms were crossed. Her eyes were locked on the screen, but I saw the tension in her jaw. General Kessler leaned forward at the moderator's table. Who's the origin point? I didn't smile. I didn't dramatize. I am, I said plainly. Unrecorded. Until today. The silence that followed wasn't surprised. It was weighty. Like confirmation had just dropped through the ceiling. I advanced to the closing slide, my name in grayscale text overlaid on a faded mission insignia. I didn't come for applause, I said, and I don't expect any. I looked out over the audience not for validation, but for witness. I came to ensure no one else vanishes between the lines. I stepped back. No one clapped. No one moved. In the control booth, Vega met my gaze through the glass and gave a single steady nod. Her hands hovered over the submission queue of the internal ethics board system. 1 click away. Moments later, my console vibrated gently. Submission received. Wuvi the paper 0997. Anonymous upload, origin doctrine, strategic authorship logs, clearance trail. I didn't need to ask. It's begun, Vega whispered through the comms. And somewhere in that audience, the truth started shifting from shadow to spotlight. They said names didn't matter. But the moment mine appeared on the doctrine, I knew they'd never steal it again. The conference room wasn't large, but the presence in it could have filled a stadium. Walls lined with soundproof panels. A single oval table, glass-topped, surrounded by the quiet gravity of polished shoes and measured voices. It smelled faintly of coffee dust and protocol. Vega sat beside me, shoulders straight, expression unreadable. Across from us, 2 ethics board officials in dark suits, one NATO representative in civilian business wear, and General Kessler chairing silent still. The folders before them were stamped with international insignia and internal resolution tags, but it was the one in the center that mattered. Rivers Construct. I didn't speak. Not yet. Neither did they. Item 5, the NATO rep began adjusting his reading glasses. Strategic Resolution 38C. The renaming motion submitted 3 days ago has cleared preliminary clearance and review by the Joint Strategic Doctrine Council. One of the ethics board members interjected, his voice low but firm. There are concerns. Kessler didn't shift. Political ones. Yes. A pause. The implications of renaming doctrine already in training circulation could set precedent. The room was still. Vega leaned in slightly, not toward them, toward me, a subtle anchor. Then the NATO rep spoke again. This isn't a precedent, it's a correction. Kessler finally moved, tapping a single finger once against the folder's edge. It's also overdue. And if we're afraid of truth, simply because it's inconvenient, then we've lost the plot. A silence. Then, all in favor of formal attribution to Colonel Sloan Rivers under the title Rivers Construct. Hands rose, one by one, all of them. No dissent, no hesitation, unanimous. The motion passed like the quiet swing of a blade, not loud, not violent, just irrevocable. They turned to me then, not to congratulate, not even to apologize, just to acknowledge. Kessler pushed the stamped folder toward me. We don't name things lightly. Or late. But today we do both. The ink was still fresh. It smelled like history. I took the folder, fingers steady, and nodded once. That was enough. The session adjourned. No speeches. No champagne. Just shifting chairs and clipped conversations as the room emptied. Vega walked with me toward the backstage corridor. As we turned the corner, I stopped short. Hayden was waiting there. She wasn't in uniform. Her blazer hung too loosely and her hair was slightly windblown, like she hadn't meant to come inside but did anyway. In her hands was a folder. Not the stamped one, not official. A manila one I recognized immediately by the ink bleeding through its edges. She stepped forward, wordless, and held it out. I opened it. Inside was the original strategy draft, the one from years ago. My handwriting all over the margins. Notes arrows, one phrase underlined 3 times. Never assume terrain stays still. Hayden didn't speak. Her eyes were wet but didn't spill. Her mouth pressed in a line that might have once held pride or shame. Maybe both. I took the file and nodded just once. She nodded back. Then she turned and walked away. No apology, no justification, only return. That was enough. Some defeats don't echo. They collapse inward like a star that burned too long on stolen light. The chamber was designed to be neutral. Its walls paneled in sober oak, a single flag suspended above the tribunal desk, its fabric motionless despite the quiet churn beneath it. The room was neither forgiving nor cruel, just indifferent. Hayden sat centered, posture erect, but not rigid, hands folded in front of her on the table. She wore full uniform, not to make a statement, just to finish what she'd started in the skin she'd borrowed. Across from her, 3 members of the Military Review Board arranged their papers with clinical finality. And beside the last row of seats, out of direct sight but unmistakably present, I stood. I didn't speak. I wasn't called to. This wasn't my trial. It never had been. One of the board members nodded to Hayden. You may proceed with your statement, Lieutenant Colonel. She didn't clear her throat, didn't fumble. She just began. I benefited from a silence I didn't earn. That was her first sentence. No preamble, no blame. I was credited with doctrines I didn't write. She continued. Awarded positions I didn't fully deserve. And while I didn't falsify records, I didn't correct them either. I let the wrong version of events stand because it elevated me. There was no tremor in her voice, just precision. For that, I accept the consequences. I only ask that moving forward, this institution distinguishes between intentional fraud and inherited injustice, not to excuse, but to evolve. She finished. That was all. The board deliberated for less than 10 minutes. Their decision was delivered with professional detachment, Effective immediately, Lieutenant Colonel Hayden Rivers is placed on a 5-year promotion hold. Public censure to be issued internally appended to her official record. No discharge recommended. Hayden nodded once, understood. No one clapped. No one looked away either. As she stood, she turned slightly, meeting my eyes for the first time since the broadcast. Her face was unreadable, neither penitent nor proud. Just bare. Not forgiveness, she said softly. Not yet. But maybe. Understanding. I didn't respond, just held her gaze. That was enough. After the board dismissed, I returned to my office, small windowed functional. The light on my desk console blinked once. Beside it, taped to the glass monitor, was a single sticky note, pale yellow, slightly curved at the corner like it had been folded, then smoothed. The handwriting was unmistakable. You never needed my seat at the table. You built a better one. No signature. But none was needed. I sat down, the note still pressed under my fingertips. Not reconciliation, but the war had ended. And this was what surrender without sound looked like. I didn't come back to reclaim anything. I came to prove I never needed what they withheld. The porch creaked the same way it had when I was 13, soft and crooked like a breath held too long. The swing still hung there, unmoving, its chains rusting in the joints. The air smelled of wood smoke and pine, but the fire had long gone out. I stood there for a moment, one hand on the old railing, the other gripping a plain manila folder. The edges were crisp, the contents final. When the door opened, it was David who stood behind it. Older, stiffer, eyes still calculating, still trying to lead every moment like a briefing. He didn't speak. I didn't expect him to. I stepped inside. The house hadn't changed. Same wall clock with its perpetual 1-minute lag. Same shelf of retired medals and framed documents. Same faint scent of lemon polish and the distant memory of burned coffee. Elaine was in the kitchen. She turned as I entered, one hand frozen mid-reach toward a cupboard. Her expression didn't shift, just her shoulders. Hayden's not here, David said quietly, as if it needed clarifying. I didn't come for her. I placed the folder on the dining table. A simple gesture. No dramatics. Inside were 2 documents, my birth certificate officially relinked to current clearance and command identity, and my transfer order from West Point to classified operations, signed and stamped. It had taken years to reconstruct the paper trail, years to own what was always mine. You don't need to accept me, I said, voice steady. Just stop pretending I never existed. Elaine stepped forward slowly. She looked older too, but not just from time, from effort, or the absence of it. She looked at the folder but didn't touch it. Her eyes flicked to mine instead. Not challenging, not warm, just searching. David exhaled a long, dry sound that didn't quite qualify as a sigh. We were wrong, he said simply. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever hear. And it was enough. Elaine reached out, not for the folder, not for herself, but for my sleeve. Her fingers landed lightly, a touch I could have shrugged off with ease. I didn't. She didn't let go. I stood there allowing it. Not for comfort, not for closure, just for recognition. I'm not staying, I said after a moment. David nodded. I turned, walked toward the hallway. Each step felt like stepping across a fault line, but one that had already split years ago. Then I saw it, the photo, hung in the narrow corridor near the stairs. A summer barbecue from a lifetime back. David with tongs in hand, Elaine holding a glass of lemonade. Hayden mid-laugh, blurred. And next to her, me, not cropped, not faded, framed like I'd always been there. They hadn't changed the house, but they'd changed that. I didn't pause long, just enough to register it. Let it land. Outside, the sunlight felt different than it had in October. Not warmer, just brighter. I didn't need fire to prove I'd returned. The light was enough. On my birthday, a cake arrived with 3 words in blue icing: General, Sister, Strategist. The training center at Fort Allegra hummed with the kind of focus that only silence could sharpen. Cadets filed in fresh uniforms, clean boots, notebooks pristine. Their eyes carried that electric mix of fear and ambition, the kind I'd once worn like armor. I stood at the head of the classroom, chalk already on my fingers. Behind me, the screen displayed today's lesson, asymmetric response tactics in gray zones. But I never began with slides. Some battles, I told them, leave no map, only scars. A hand went up. Cadet Murphy, barely 20, still trying to grow into his jawline. Ma'am, he asked, what's the hardest part of war? I let the silence settle before answering. Surviving, I said, without becoming stone. He nodded slowly. Pencil paused midair like he didn't know how to write that down. But I saw it land. The rest of the hour passed in sharp questions, tactical diagrams, a case study from the Balkans. When I dismissed them, a few lingered. They always did. One young woman, Cadet Park, approached with a notebook full of highlights. Do you think legacy matters? She asked quietly. Even if no one sees it right away? I smiled. Legacy isn't about who remembers your name. It's about who uses your work like it's theirs and does it better. That seemed to satisfy her. She nodded and walked off, boots echoing down the corridor. Back in D.C., my apartment was quiet. The light from the window cut across the floor in clean angles. My phone buzzed with a single message. Hayden, still listening? I didn't reply. Some things didn't need a response. A small box waited on my kitchen counter, no label, just a handwritten note that read, "Open today." Inside was a cake. Not elaborate, not fancy. White frosting, blue piping, slightly lopsided. 3 words in soft cursive: General. Sister. Strategist. There was no signature, but I didn't need one. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one I'd built myself when I moved in. Light spilled across the wood like an unspoken benediction. I cut a slice. Took a bite. At 13, I'd eaten by a gas station window, hands trembling, soaked, and silent. At 33, I ate beside legacy. And it didn't taste bitter. Later, as the sun dipped below the skyline, I placed a new photo on the shelf. Me and my students' uniforms, mismatched smiles, uneven shoulders squared. I stood in the center, not towering, not shadowed. Just there, centered, seen, and finally, home. The war Sloan never asked for ended not with vengeance, but with recognition. Those who once erased her name now live under the weight of truth that could no longer be hidden. Justice didn't arrive with noise or spectacle. It arrived quietly, through evidence, through resolve, through scars worn like stars. When injustice is met with unwavering courage, the final verdict can echo through a lifetime. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. If this story moved you, like, share and subscribe, and comment your thoughts below. Type 1 if you felt seen, or 2 if you think the story could have gone further.